Redditors who have gone were declared missing. What is your story? I forget how old I was, but I was probably around 10. My friend and I started raking leaves for cash around our suburban neighborhood. We kept going house to house asking anyone who had a tree in their yard if they wanted them raked for $5. We eventually went to so many houses we got ourselves lost within the crisscross streets of the neighborhood, since we really never left our block of houses beforehand. Then the sun set and we found ourselves lost trying to recognize street names or anything familiar in the dark with only street lights lighting the way. Eventually, as we're wandering lost, we hear cop sirens and lights blare and pull over and ask for our names. We got picked up and taken back to our houses. It felt like a long drive to us 10-year-olds, but in reality it was like 4 blocks lol. Boy, did we get the biggest scolding ever, and our parents took our hard-earned money. The story of how I went missing is also one of my first memories. When I was 5, I went on holiday with my family to Scotland. We were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by nothing but land dominated by trees. There wasn't much to do, so my sister and I played hide and seek. I thought it would be a great idea to hide right next to the front door of the cottage we were staying in. Inside of a giant bush, I watched my sister look for me for about 5 minutes, until she clearly gave up and went inside. However, I never give up on anything, and decided to stay until I was found. After a short period, 15 minutes or so, more people started playing the game. I now watched my parents sprint around in front of me, while I silently giggled in the bush thinking I'm so good at this game. More and more people started to play, other holiday goers in cottages nearby, park rangers and police. I stayed in that bush for hours and hours until it got dark, having the time of my life. My sister was only 7, so she didn't help look for me and just sat by the doorstep. As it got darker outside, my yellow jacket got brighter, and after a whole day of searching for me in the nearby woods, my sister realized I was stood right next to her. Best game of hide and seek ever. When I was young, probably about 6 I think, my family went on vacation to Yosemite. We stayed in a small cabin at a campground. I met another kid who was a bit older than me, and we went exploring. Apparently we went a bit too far, and eventually ran into a bear cub. We just stood and stared at each other for a few minutes and went our separate ways. When I got back to the cabin, I found out that park rangers had been out looking for me because my parents had no idea where I was. For some reason they didn't think my bear story was as cool as I did. As a paramedic, we once attended a call for a male with sore feet. Attended a lay-by by the side of a road to a perfectly polite chap who did have some very nasty blisters. He'd been to a family funeral, got a bit upset and had gone for a walk to clear his head, and just kept walking for 4 days. Turns out he was from the same area as where I grew up, about 250 miles away, and we reminisced about the countryside and some of the good pubs etc. He admitted that maybe he was a bit depressed and probably needed some help. Unfortunately, all we could offer was a trip to hospital, but we did what we could. Later that shift, I'm perusing Facebook and see an old school friend has shared a missing person appeal. It's our walking patient. I rang the police and told them where our chap was, and they were very pleased, as they expected a dog walker to find him hanging somewhere. I was 8 and on vacation. Decided to go for a walk without telling anyone. Played all afternoon and the beach came at night. Oh boy, was everyone mad. I had a mental breakdown in 2015 after losing a job, after having a hard year. So I packed a bag, got on my motorbike and rode to a party spot, Gold Coast. I got out enough cash to hold me over for a week and turned off my mobile before I left town. I spent a whole week just hitting the beach, partying, hitting bars and clubs. I stayed at a backpacker hostel and hung out with random backpackers. Overall, it was an amazing and refreshing week. I left to ride back home. Just before the Great Dividing Range, I got pulled over by the cops. Turns out, my 2 co-workers I saw after I got fired were worried, so they came by my house just to check up on me. My housemates then didn't see me for a few days after being told that I'd been fired, so they searched town and reported me to the cops as missing. I had a known history of depression and suicidal tendencies. The cops searched through my records. No mobile phone activity, no social media activity, no contact with family members. So it turns out while I was off trying to just escape my shitty life for a week, everyone thought I'd killed myself or something. My license plate number was flagged, so when I went past the highway patrol it must have come up on their computer to pull me over. The cop was actually quite nice. He mainly just wanted to know I was okay. He called in and had me removed as a missing person. In Australia, once you're listed as a missing person you have to be cited and verified by a police officer to be removed. I got home 8 hours later to a lot of worried people. I honestly thought no one gave a duck about me. If I knew it was going to cause so much trouble I would have at least left a note. I ran away from home due to my alcoholic stepmom. My dad would always file a missing person report and cops would eventually find me and bring me home. At 15 I was homeless for 6 months and selling acid for food and a place to stay was still better than dealing with my stepmom. She drank herself to death and I found peace. My cousin was kidnapped when he was very young, maybe 4/5. My aunt was living in Belgium at the time. He was kidnapped and thrown in a car. Witnessed by many people. Police were called. My poor aunt was frantic. He was left at the side of the road about 8 hours later. But to this day they never found out who took him, where they took him to, and what happened to him while he was gone. It's a taboo subject that I could never bring up to my aunt. I was a teen and ran away from home and was missing for a few weeks. Left my small town due to small town it going on and was basically road tripping with a friend. I went to rehab. I don't know why I didn't think to tell anyone, but I was a drug addict so my brain was mush. My now ex-boyfriend was the only person who knew. About a week in, I got called into the main office at the rehab and was told that my mother got a hold of them, freaking out and telling them that I had been missing for a month. She was exaggerating, but they legally weren't allowed to tell her that I was there, so I had to call her to explain the situation. When I got out, I had messages from tons of people asking if I was alive and found out even my old job was contacted. Lol. I found out that my best friend and my brother messaged my ex-BF, and he ignored them and never told me that they contacted him. If he had, I would have told him to tell them where I was and the whole thing could have been avoided. I felt really bad about the whole situation because it stressed a lot of people out. Not me but my hubby, and this was years ago. Hubby was about 8 or 9 years old when he and a group of boys were approached by some middle-aged Italians to sell candy. The kids were loaded into a van and taken to neighboring towns to hawk this candy. At some point the kids started asking when they were going home as the van was going further than they were expecting. A few kids started crying, then out comes a gun and they're told you're not going home. More tears and then the van stopped, I believe for a bathroom stop, but it was near an open field. A few of the kids decided to make a mad dash through this field, being chased by the men, and made it to a grocery store. The authorities were alerted and their parents came to collect the children. They were about an hour away from home when found. Hubby is 55 now and hyper vigilant about the grandkids and stranger danger. I took my 3 children and did a flip to get away from their father who had attempted to kill me in front of them. I drove around 150 miles away. We were given a room in a woman's refuge in a coastal town. While the processing papers went through, the children asked to go to the beach. Even though it was November and cold, they were happily making sandcastles when I noticed a photographer. He kept directing the camera towards us, but casually tracked away when I looked up. I was worried that the photos could give away our location, so went to speak to him, but I couldn't catch up, so left it. I found out later that I had been reported as missing and a danger to the children by their father. We did not stay in the refuge long as I never felt completely safe there after that. Not me, but a friend's ex. I know how it sounds. This girl was involved in a pretty bad abusive relationship. She tried to leave and suddenly disappeared. Months had passed and people began to assume the worst. Eventually she managed to escape her kidnapper and return home. The details are scarce, unfortunately, but it's best for her sake. My friend received a friend request from her on Facebook shortly after her return. She's now missing an eye, in a neck brace, and her head is bald and scarred from brain surgery. Poor girl was beaten so badly. I finally found my way out of IKEA. My cousin went missing, called the cops, gave a statement, and suddenly he appears. Everyone was very happy but still confused. Turns out he fell asleep under the sofa. My auntie was missing for 15 years. She stopped answering calls, moved house and changed her number. I grew from age 3 to 18. I had 2 younger siblings she didn't know existed. One afternoon I answer the phone at my parents' house. My mum had never changed our phone number. I've already moved out but I'm visiting my dog. My family are away for the day. It's this aunt. I recognizes her voice from her reading me bedtime stories. She sounds so similar to my mum. I'm naturally freaking out about keeping her on the line. Getting contact information, where she lives now, etc. Long story short, it's been 9 years. She is medicated for her schizophrenia and happy to be back in the family. My favorite story is from when my cousin was 4 and we were on the beach with our whole family. At one moment he just disappeared. We searched for him for hours and called the police. Turns out he went to a random hotel that was 2 minutes away from the beach to poop. Met a bunch of kids in the hotel and played with them and everyone just thought he was a guest there. He even had dinner because the buffet had just been served. We almost sent a diving team to see if he drowned. Was playing hide and seek when I was 6. I hide. Nobody seek. Not very eventful. But I was probably in 1st or 2nd grade when we had taken a family trip to Las Vegas. We had spent a lot of the hot day in circus exploring the arcade, rides, and tomfoolery they had going on. But at night we went out to explore, no clue where. There was some kind of crazy light show. This white awning above a walking path filled with people, music, and all of these neat lights and lasers flashing around, being cast onto the covering. I think I stared at the lights too long and tried to keep following my parents without really looking where I was going. By the time I looked for them, they were nowhere in sight. Suddenly the music was scary, too loud, and I couldn't listen for my parents when I called out for them. The crowd instantly seemed thicker and the lights almost distorted what I saw. It all seemed so disorienting. I started crying because I lost my parents and they weren't answering when I called out for them. A man came up to me in a uniform, maybe security or police, and was very kind to the tiny terrified human and helped me look for them. I'm sure this whole endeavor wasn't very long, but it felt like an eternity. We eventually found them. He tapped my mom on the shoulder and said something like, "I think you may have lost this." She responded with a no, and carried on, and that is my story. Ran away from a residential treatment center that wasn't giving me the care I needed and was threatening to send me to another RTC famous for their abusive tactics. I ended up being driven to a hospital by the police. After they talked with the staff at the RTC I ran from, even they didn't think I should go to the infamously abusive one. Later on, the abusive one closed down. About 6 years ago, I hit a really nasty bottom in my addiction, alcohol. I decided to end it and broke contact with everyone as I drank myself to death. When my family found the room I was staying in, it was covered in blood. I was throwing up blood, and the police suspected that I had killed myself and gone somewhere to die. In the meantime, in some state, I had crawled into the road covered in blood and was taken to the ICU for a week until they put the pieces together and notified my family. Fun times. Note: 5 years plus sober and a lot better now. I can't tell you. They haven't found me yet. When I was a teenager, I got my stupid heart broken really bad. As a young and dumb teen, I skipped school and drank at a sketchy little bar not too far from school. Got it faced, lost track of time. Phone died. When my parents noticed that I didn't come home, they came to my school to ask if I was still there. When they were told that I didn't come to class that day, they thought I ran away from home. They were driving around looking for me and saw me drunk as it puking my guts out on a sidewalk. Man, that was one hell of an ass whooping. When I was about 3 or 4 I fell asleep in my grandma's bed, but because of the groove from her sleeping there over the years she couldn't tell. Grandma freaked out and filed missing persons report. The police came and it was assumed I had been taken from the house. Boy were they relieved when I stumbled out after my nap. I yeeted myself off a cliff. Why? Oh grave a circumflex a diaresis. I was a kid. Miraculously survived with only some bad scrapes and bruises. But my parents were shouting, and, well, you can't discipline what you can't find. I decided to run away with my boyfriend without informing anyone for a period of 2 weeks. When I came back, everyone was mad at me. I wasn't necessarily missing, so to speak, but many of my friends thought I was dead. My mother is bipolar and probably has a personality disorder. She was extremely abusive to me while I was growing up. In the late 1990s, I leave home at 16, with her blessing, to go work as a nanny for several families in other parts of the US. A year later, I became ill. I ended up having to go back to my parents' home for about 2 months while I was still 17, but only 2-3 weeks away from turning 18. My mother began mistreating me again, so I left, without telling anyone. Mom called the police. The highway patrol called me and I explained the situation and they told me I was fine and wished me luck. Mom calls me, screaming. She's furious she can't force me to come back. She told me if I didn't come back, I'd be dead to her. I decided not to go back. We didn't speak for years. Fast forward to 2007. I join Facebook. I see people I know from my childhood and youth. So I start adding them because I want to see how they're doing, etc. People are freaked out, asking me WHOTF I am etc. And I'm wondering WTF is going on. Turns out, when I refused to go home as my mother demanded, she had written an obituary for me, and since she was a frequent columnist, a local paper published it. All of my friends and everyone in that area thought I was dead for nearly 10 years. When I confronted my mom about it, she said, I wasn't lying. You were dead to me. Oh yay, one I can reply to. When my friend and I were about 12, we rented one of those boats you paddle with your legs, like a bike. We went on a river known as a serpentine in our town because it weaves so much between the reeds. My mom was sitting on the bank and started reading a magazine and let us do our thing. We go off on our adventure and eventually we reached the other end of the river. I remember watching a survival show and you can count with your hands or something to see how many hours you have left in the day or something by putting your hands under the sun. It was weird kid logic, and we assumed we'd been gone half an hour. We turn around and head back. There is our moms and dads standing with the owners of the paddle boats and a cop. Our moms were absolutely panicking and we come strolling down like, hey, what's the problem? Our parents see us and come rushing over asking if we're okay. Turns out, we'd been gone for 4 hours and they went looking for us upstream instead of the downstream way we went. They were scared we might have tipped over and drowned. My friend and I were having so much fun on the boat we didn't even realize how long we've been gone. Classic miscommunication and kids being dumb. She and I were fine, but damn were my legs stiff the next day. This is probably the best story I ever heard. Made it onto Interpol missing persons list. I guess not technically a missing person. When I was about 9 or 10 I was out skiing with one of my dad's friends and his son. We decided to meet at a particular lift line as it was the end of the day and the lifts were shutting. We must have miscommunicated and ended up down the bottom of a black diamond run. Once I got down to the bottom the lift had shut and the operators had left. I had skied the mountain since I was 4 so I knew how to get back. Although it would have taken hours to walk back. Lucky after about 30 of walking up the steep as a hill with my skies I heard a bunch of police sleds out. Managed to wave them down in the pitch black and drop me back to our accommodation. My parents' mate came back white as a ghost thinking I was lost somewhere. Sorry Steve. I was 7 in Ocean City, Maryland. My dad took the kids for a huge cousin vacation without my mom for the first and last time ever. Being a very responsible 7-year-old I was tasked with washing the sand toys in the ocean water before we packed up. But I also had zero sense of direction and the beach was packed. I became turned around near the water and just started walking. And kept walking. I remembered being told not to talk to strangers so I walked for 37 blocks until I found a lifeguard that looked familiar. Apparently I was missing and she knew exactly who I was when I told her I was lost. I went on a hike and just disappeared from everyone I knew. One day I told my friends I was going on a hike and I just never showed up to work or my house again. After a couple of days I was declared missing and after a couple of months most people assumed I was dead. I hitchhiked across the US, Mexico and Canada for 2 years. Just remembered a story my friend told me. She and her family were at the mall. Somehow her youngest boy got separated from them. They contacted security and were just frantic looking for him. They were told to go home after a while and the police would contact them. They went home. Very upset of course, and to their surprise their son was there. Apparently after not finding them, he decided they forgot him, so he decided to walk home. A nice couple saw this little boy walking by himself next to a highway and realized something was wrong. They drove him home. I'm not sure if they waited with him. This was before cell phones as well. When I was 5, my mom left my cousin, 6, and I in the car to run into gas station. This was back in the 80s, I should add. My mom's car had those back seats that folded down from inside the car. So I had a great idea to scare my mom, so my cousin and I climbed in the back and closed the seats. It was about 10 minutes later and no mom, so we popped out with smiles and saw a cop car and mom my crying. I was never allowed to stay in the car alone again after that. Not me, but my very good friend in grad school was out sailing off of Galveston, Texas with another friend. They were both drinking and lost control of their catamaran with a strong offshore breeze. The friend's wife first noticed and called me, then others. No one had seen them. Worried, she called the police, who called the Coast Guard. The next day they were discovered over 100 miles in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. It was later discovered both strong currents and wind pushed them out past what was presumed possible after missing 4x hours. Both were severely dehydrated, delirious, and babbling about sharks. Both were rushed to local hospital. Total bill $120K. Made the Houston Chronicle and they never lived it down. To this day they both are happy to be alive. Moral of the story: boating and drinking don't mix. Never turn your back on the ocean. When I was 8, I decided to walk to my sister's apartment, 3.2 miles away. I checked the distance as an adult 30 years later. My mom couldn't find me at my usual haunts, so she called the police. The last she saw me, I was topless, so the police were looking for a little boy in no shirt. When I had actually stopped by the house and put one on, she was relieved when my sister called and said, "Guess who just showed up?" Not me, but our drummer went out to get some drinks with friends. I wasn't present during that time. After a few hours, one of the friends invited a cousin to join them. After getting really drunk, the cousin offered to take them home cause he was the only one who had a car. Apparently, the friend sold them to the cousin and halfway through the trip they were intercepted by a van and kidnapped for ransom. They went missing for about 3 days, and because they were dormers, the school had to talk to the kidnappers and it wasn't disclosed, but I think the family just settled on a deal and paid the ransom. He never went back here ever since he was released. Unrelated, but my dog randomly decides to sit under a table and sometimes I don't know he's there, so I'll go all over the house calling his name and this little it doesn't even move until I'm screaming his name and running around looking for him. Just pops up behind me like, "You rang?" I got too drunk in a foreign country and got mugged. I was lost, terrified, and didn't speak the language well enough. So I broke into a basement cellar to hide and passed out. But then I got arrested because apparently the cellar was an apartment. I kept trying to give them my parents' phone number, but they couldn't understand me and it was Thanksgiving, so the American embassy was closed. 2 days later, they let me go. My parents were less than thrilled, but because things were so poorly handled they let me off as long as I paid for repairs. So, the moral of the story is don't go to Spain. Another story. Someone in my neighborhood was abducted from her bus stop last year. They found her phone in a drain grate. All her friends were freaking out, parents panicking, and other parents terrified that their kids may be next. Turns out, she had a secret 20-year-old boyfriend who she snuck away with and they just had sex all day. Dude was arrested and nobody's really heard from the girl since.